Welcome, my friends, to the podcast that never ends, where we gather our clan and talk about peace and love in our lives, the difficulties along the journey, and how we rise up. We will experience a little thing I call Kluberty together, find our sweet spot, and planting our seeds to watch them grow in our magic garden. I'm Uncle Dave, and our transformation starts right here. Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Doctor. I was already getting ahead of myself because I'm so excited today. Peace, love, and bring a bat. Man, we're bringing on Dr. Kevin Gazzara, and I can't wait to talk about positive intelligence and leadership, what that really means. Because we connected. The internet has great ways of connecting us, and we're connected to the right people. So I can't wait to talk to Dr. Kevin Gazzara. How you doing, sir?
Good, good. And David, I'm very informal, so Kevin works just fine.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, things are terrific. So, a beautiful day. Looking forward to uh, providing some useful information to the listeners today. If they hang on to for the whole session, I'm sure they're going to get lots of practical tips that I've developed over my 30 years in industry. I spent 18 years at Intel. In my last 10 years there, I was managing their management leadership development residential programs for the world. And we used to do 2,500 managers and leaders in 10 different countries each year. And when I retired from Intel in 2007 to start Magna Leadership Solutions, uh, we had just finished training our 40,000th manager. So I
Wow.
got pretty good at that, and it's a passion of mine. To even to the point where I went back, I did my undergrad in engineering and business, but had such a passion. I went back and did all my doctoral work in organizational leadership. So I have a good academic background, but mostly I really like to talk about the practical background. So academics are fine, but if you can't apply them, then the value is pretty low.
Right. That's the biggest thing with leaders. A lot of people will raise their hand. We were talking just now before about being a leader, right? Everybody says they want to be a leader, but it's that
Mhm.
practical. It's like when you're stuck in the middle of it, did you make the right decisions? Did you have the right behaviors? You know, well, first, why don't we just understand? Because I know one of the cornerstones is that positive intelligence. Why don't you
Mhm.
explain to us what that means to you?
Sure. Well, so there's a fantastic book out called Positive Intelligence. It's written by a gentleman by the name of Shirzad Chamine. And I got introduced to positive intelligence about 5 years ago. And to kind of describe it at a very high level is I'm sure most people listening are probably familiar with emotional intelligence or what's known as EQ. And that was developed more in the 90s by Daniel Goleman. And Daniel, Dr. Goleman, did a fantastic job. It's a wonderful read. And it's really about, not only do we have IQ, but we have EQ. And what Shirzad, and, even when I was doing my doctoral research, I did a lot of research on emotional intelligence because my dissertation was focused around motivation and engagement. And the leaders that have a very high EQ, emotional intelligence quotient, generally or statistically always do better than ones that have a lower EQ. And what Goldman did was he developed this kind of insight into the different elements for his emotional intelligence focused around control of ourself and control of others and understanding and relationships. But the thing I always found with Goldman's work was fantastic work. And his work I always found was a little bit more descriptive than prescriptive. So once you learn about it, moving forward is not kind of a checklist path.
Sure.
So what Shirzai has done with positive intelligence was I had taken the 6 week course initially, and then I was so jazzed about it that I went back and did the 26-week program to get certified to teach it. And since then, I've taught hundreds of of people on the concept of positive intelligence. But the biggest difference was Shazad took all the work that Goleman had done, Howard Gardner, a lot of things from David Rock on neuroscience, um, uh, um, also on positive, on some work that Daniel Martin Seligman has had done uh, uh, from the University of Pennsylvania, and he kind of put it all together and created an operating system that kind of sits on top of all the great work that's done, and it melds all of the pieces together. And what he found was that we really have portions of our brain. One is what he calls the saboteur brain, and that's the those little voices on your head that said, you know, woulda, coulda, shoulda. And then he says you have your sage brain, and the sage brain is really how you put things in action. And what he found was that there was he defines 10 saboteurs that we all have. Sorry, that we all can have. We may not have all of them, but we have them, usually have them to a different degree. And let me describe those to the listeners here. So, and these are in no particular order. So, and maybe when I tell you the name, you'll have a like, oh, I have that little voice in my head. So, you know, one of the saboteurs is called the controller, right? Obviously, you want to maintain all that control. You have the hyperachiever, like I can always do better. You have uh, that restless saboteur, and the restless saboteur is always not one worrying about what you could do better, but what you've already done and what you should have done. So and then you have the stickler, which is always just focused on, you know, nothing's ever good enough, right? That you know, if you think you're a perfectionist, you probably have a very high stickler saboteur. Then the next one would be the pleaser saboteur, where you basically want to avoid conflict, you know, make everybody happy, all work together, even if it's at the expense of being successful. And then you have the hyper vigilant, which is the constantly, you know, a lot of micromanagers have this one, right? Where they're constantly checking in and checking in and checking in and not allowing the individuals to do their work or setting up a system where the individuals can do their work efficiently. And then you have the avoider saboteur, which is, you know, eventually it's just going to go away, so I'll avoid it and hopefully I don't have to deal with it. You have the victim saboteur, which is, you know, poor me, oh me kind of thing, where everything's against you. You're looking at things in a very negative way. And then the last saboteur, the saboteur that is attached to the bigger saboteur is what they call a hyper-rational saboteur. And hyper-rational is, and that's my big one, right? You know, coming from a technical background, my hyper-rational saboteur says, you know, let's just have rational discussions, forget all this emotional stuff, and let's just go after it. And the more you push, the more, you know, it's difficult for you and difficult for the other person. And those are the 9 saboteurs. And then you have this overarching saboteur, which he calls the judge saboteur. And
Mm.
the judge saboteur really uses all of these, what he calls accomplice saboteurs, and pulls them in as appropriate. So anything that you're doing, whether you're looking at a project or dealing with another individual, is the judge is always there. And the key is, you know, to make sure that you're not bringing in too much baggage to have that conversation or to deal with that problem and so forth. And what positive intelligence does is it teaches you, one, to recognize which saboteur is showing up. You don't want to get rid of them, right? That it's kind of like putting your
Right.
hand on a hot
They
stove.
right. They do something to kind of give you that awareness. You know, it's how you handle that awareness.
Exactly, right. And you want to make sure that they're there. You want to say, okay, thank you. But the key is once you start arguing with them, you know, where it's back and forth and they're getting stronger and stronger and stronger, it's taking you away from, you know, fulfilling your full potential. So that's the idea is recognize the saboteur. Um, he has, you know, many tools of how to deal with them, right? But the key is to just keep them at bay, but not to get rid of them because, you know, if there's a hot stove out there You want that sensation in your hand to know. You just don't want to keep it on the hot stove.
Yeah, no, and once you aware or you're aware and dive into that positive intelligence, but there's also positive toxic, to be toxic. That fake it till you make it type of thinking, which really is not healthy for us. You
Mm.
know, it might be okay. You might learn along the way, but how does that all blend in also with your positive intelligence?
Well, if I had to, deal with someone who's kind of fake it before you make it kind of thing is typically one or two of the saboteurs show up very, very strongly, right? So one would be is the controller, right? Where they, regardless of whether things have gone bad or whatever, they have to put on, because they need to be in control, they have to put on a front that basically says something different than what everybody else is seeing. And then the other ones could be is they could also have a high victim saboteur where they don't want to be ever be in a situation where where they've had to say, hey, something has gone wrong. I was part of that, where they would be blamed, right? So, and of course, as you can imagine, if you have the victim saboteur, then the avoider saboteur comes in to help, right? Because okay, I don't want to deal with it, so let me take myself out of the situation. I'm going to go in and say everything is great. I've done a wonderful job, and then I'm moving on. So okay, I don't need to talk to anybody else, right? So all of these kind of start playing in with each other, and once you kind of understand which one is becoming the dominant one, if you can get the dominant one quiet, quiet the dominant one,
Mhm.
then you've got the possibility of bringing in, what Shazad talks about as the six sage powers. I'm sorry, the five sage powers, and the five sage powers are how you deal with the saboteur. The first one is around empathizing, right? Kind of recognizing that you need to develop the relationship first before you can get to the rational piece. You can explore kind of this kind of fascinated anthropologist, so to
Mhm.
kind of dig a little bit deeper. You can do some innovation, think way outside the box. Um, you can do what he calls navigating, which is kind of flash forward. Okay. So let's imagine, we're a year from now, what would that look like? Right. And then kind of use that, or how would another sage or somebody that's really an expert in this area, how would they deal with it or have dealt with it? And then the last piece is kind of what he calls is the activate sage power. And the activate sage power is really doing something. It's just, I mean, leadership is really about taking action more so than just espousing policies and so forth. So the last one for him is activate, where you really kind of need to preempt the saboteurs, where they're talking to you, but you want to take that action before you spend all the time listening to the woulda, coulda, shouldas.
Yeah, that's where we sometimes get stuck in, and depending on where your strengths are. But all of that is, I guess, being able to identify that really helps us with a better foundation. You know, by understanding where some of our weaknesses are, to then turn them around to be some of our strengths.
Yeah. Yeah, and then other thing for the listeners is if you go to pqtrainingandcoaching.com, you'll get us a quick start guide. It's free. Anyone can take the assessment, so you know what the strengths are of your saboteurs. And
Mm.
there's lots and lots of information on that site as well as the PQ site. And whenever I do any coaching or working with leadership teams, one of the very first things we do is we have them go through this PQ program, or at least take the assessments so that they have a good idea of the things that they need to work on.
Yeah, is how do you build leaders from ordinary people? I mean, we're all ordinary people, right? We put our pants on the same way, no matter what, or dresses, yeah, uh, or but so we're all ordinary people. I mean, from our perspectives, we're all ordinary people, but not everybody's a leader. How does that transformation get done, or what are some of the things that you help people do to do that?
Well, I think that. I think the first thing, David, is to recognize that that we're all, I think we're all born with uh, potential qualities that can be turned into leadership. And I think leadership is a portion is born and a portion is learned, right? That I think there's certain leaders that you could look at, let's pick like John F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King or whatever. I think those individuals were born and kind of lived in certain circumstances that maybe gave them an edge up, and then they took the opportunity to kind of build upon that, right? So you have this natural talent that you're born with, and then you build the skill on top of that. So and they become, recognized as exceptional leaders. I think if you look at all of the really the best leaders, the ones that are admired and have really created the most kind of successful environments, all of them have one thing in common. And the one thing in common is they recognize the value of developing relationships, of developing teams, and if you truly want to dig down even to the next level, all of them maintain what is known as a servant leadership mindset, right? And the servant leadership mindset is all about kind of giving back, right? Where it's the focus is on the team as opposed to focus on yourself. So authoritarian leaders, all the focus is on them. Everything has to be about me. Only I can fix everything. I have more knowledge than everybody else. So when the focus is there, even though that's known as an authoritarian leadership, it really lacks what you would use to define true leadership, right? It's much more manipulation than anything else. And if you take a certain and the reason I think most people don't, maybe not most, but many people don't take the servant leadership mindset is that um, that it is a correlation environment, right, rather than a causation. And let me describe that for you. Is that most people, particularly today, with the internet, instant access to everything, cell phones, email, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, text, everything is expected. It's cause and effect, right? So there's this causation thing. Like if I put 10 minutes here, I'm going to get 10 minutes of return and I can solve it, right? And everything is very, very narrowly just in the moment focused. And servant leadership is really much more about correlation. And you may need to put in 10 hours to develop the relationship, to develop the team. Could be 10 days or 10 months,
Right.
right? And you may not see that immediate cause and effect relationship, and it's much more correlational. But we do know it will affect it in the long term. You just don't know when it's going to show up. And I think most people don't have the patience to be able to sit back and say, okay, yeah, I've met with this one challenging individual. In fact, I just had a message from a woman that I was coaching, God, 6, 8 months ago, and I just got a message back from her this morning before the podcast, saying how much of the work that we had done right now because of the project she's working on and the family challenges she has really made a difference. But we did the positive intelligence work with her. It's been almost a year ago, and it had some impact. She was good enough to do the invest the time and the focus and so forth. But now it's 9 months later, and she's finally seeing, oh, okay, what I did back then with Kevin actually is showing up now. So it's that correlational piece that you really have to. I tell people trust the system, have faith in the system,
Right.
and if you can do that, you can become a great leader. If it's just all cause and effect, and you kind of have what I would call this um, Wall Street model, like kind of you've got 90 days, everything's in little tiny
Yeah.
short blocks. Making that longer term
Well, that was
advance is
that was my next
difficult.
question, right? To be good at anything, they tell you, you need to be the 10,000 hours. The same thing as a leader, you could implement, but it always has some implementation stages that we need to have patience to do. How do you
Yeah.
build teams that that are able to do that. In corporate America, we're getting shorter and shorter timelines to turn
Mhm.
around. You might be able to shift a little bit or pivot, but the timelines are shortening for sure.
Yeah, and I think for us, what we found is so we have so my firm, when I left Intel, created this firm called Magna Leadership Solutions, and we have what we call our Leading Forward Academy. It's a 6-month program that we've done with companies all around the world, both virtually and in person. And one of the things that we found with kind of doing the leadership programs and the Leading Forward Academy is that you have to pay attention to the individuals, but you have to lead by example. And I think that's been the biggest challenge. I'd say 90% of the programs we do, we put all of the different levels of leaders together so that they can understand each other, right? A lot of leadership programs are this is an executive leadership program, and this is middle managers, and this is first line, and this is supervisors. And what we found was that getting all the levels, if you can provide tools that can be and practices that can be used at all levels, and you put them all in the same room together in the same virtual session together, and you can have a CEO sitting down with the supervisor for machinery in the factory and have that discussion. Use the same tool. Of course, the tool is complete, use on two completely different problems, but
Sure.
work on it together. And then it really gives an appreciation by the CEO of what's actually going on in the factories or the kind of the environments, whether it's software development or product development, whatever. And it gives them a different perspective. I think the thing we found is, probably 90% of the programs we do with all levels of leaders together. We've had one customer that is, the executive staff said, "Hey, we don't have the time for this, and we just need you to fix all of the middle and first line managers. So just go off and work with them." And we've told them, we can certainly give them some tools, but if they're not seeing it role modeled at the top, that the stuff that they know to use is not being used at the top, getting it to stick is going to be, it's not impossible, but it's going to be very, very
Right.
difficult.
It
And
becomes a tougher piece because you know, it goes into that, do as I say, not as I do, and that doesn't, people don't buy into that. You have to kind of buy into the whole program, and really, it's up and down, up and down the chain becomes much more effective because for each job, and by pushing that same mentality, that same process, really helps out everybody because they then feel as part of that one overall team.
yeah, very well said. It's, the, I think the challenge is, um, that there's not a lot of self-awareness of the challenges at the top, right? So because they think it's more of them than me, that's really the first thing that you want to address. And we do everything possible to try to convince people of that. Even to the point of like, okay, if you're not going to put your whole staff in, put at least one of your executives in the program so they have an appreciation of what's going on. And if we can at least get them to do that, generally what happens is they go through our program and they recognize the value of it, and then they take it back to the executive staff. And maybe the next round of activities that you do or the next program you do, you're a little more likely to get. Maybe you can't get the rest of the executive staff, but maybe you can get a couple more. And eventually, once everybody's kind of, singing from the same song sheet, uh, things get better. But it's a process for sure.
So I know you've created a part of your, you've created a lot of processes, but because it is really sticking to a process. But among the processes, how you build a team is through your flow process.
Yeah,
Could you explain that to
yeah.
us?
Yeah, so so for people that are not familiar with flow, um, flow is a concept that was developed back in actually in the late 80s, and the book was written in I think 1990. It's written by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And if you go on Amazon, you can probably buy a used copy for, $1 or whatever. But it's one of my five must-read books of all time, right? So I had read it back
Wow.
in the mid 90s, and it's really something that inspired me. And I did my all my doctoral research around the concept of flow and how to develop teams so that you can get teams into flow. But I think in the 90s, flow was kind of retermed as being in the zone, right? So most people, oh, you can see that, because I think Nike or somebody kind of use that slogan like be in the zone.
Mhm.
And the key is it's a very simple concept. It's when you have the right level of skill and the right level of challenge, right? When the challenge meets the skill, kind of if you had to draw a graph, and those 2 points meet in the center, you get into this what they call the flow state. And the flow state, I think everybody has experienced at some point in time. And it can be at work, it can be at home, you can be at during leisure. It doesn't matter. The key is that the two balance, and then essentially the biggest way to tell whether you're in flow or not is the element of time is severely distorted,
Mm.
right? Where you're working on something or you're doing something, and you look up at the clock and it's midnight and you swear it should be 9 o'clock, right? Like there's a 3 hour block that I have no idea where that went, and that's flow. And flow doesn't necessarily guarantee productivity, although typically you do get productivity out of it. But that is the scenario where you have the most creativity.
Mm.
Creativity just explodes there. And one of the things that I had done, particularly when I was managing Intel, or one of the elements we kind of roll into the Leading Forward program, is that we get people to analyze their own flow, right? So that we have them track their tasks, we have them plot their tasks on the flow grid, and it basically, if your challenge is too high and your skill is too low, you get into an environment which Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about as anxiety, right? So you have
Mm. Right.
high challenge, low skill. And if you have a high skill but low challenge, you get into a zone called boredom. So you have anxiety on one side and boredom on the other, and right in the center is kind of the sweet spot. And one of the things that I had done when I was at Intel was that I had all of my staff, they would plot their work, right? And we would look for things that were in the anxiety and boredom. And the good news is once you get a deeper understanding of flow, you can modify all your tasks so you can get them closer to the flow channel. And one of the things that I had done is I would get my staff, everybody would plot their tasks, and then once a month when we met for our monthly one-on-one development meetings, that's the other thing I'll talk about, is I always had two meetings with each of my staff members. One was on performance, so what do I need to do to provide additional help to get you resources, knock down roadblocks, keep you on schedule, get you any assistance, whatever. So that was the performance one, on how well you're doing. And then 2 weeks later, we would do the development one. The development one was much more around kind of where they needed to go in the future, skills that they needed to develop, whether it was leadership or management or project management, whatever it was. And then I would ask them to bring their flow chart in. And the boredom stuff we wanted to get moved up to closer or moved out
Mhm.
to flow, and the anxiety stuff we wanted to move down or move out or sometimes partner. And the goal was by the end of the year, end of the kind of before the next annual review session, is that I wanted to see how many of those points I could have closer to the center rather than kind of spread out. Because if you have high anxiety, you spend most of the time worrying. If you have high boredom, you spend most of the time looking for a different job or doing just kind of a crappy job. So my goal is let's get the stuff that moved towards the center. And then I think the other thing I would do, particularly when I was a project manager or program manager, when new designs came in, I was running the design teams or whatever. We'd say, hey, here's a new design for a new customer. This is what it's going to require. What I want all of you to do, all of the engineers, is I want you to plot where you think on the flow diagram this would put you,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
And then rather than just saying, okay, hey, Bill, look like you have some open time, or Lisa, you have some open time. Let's give it to one of you, or have both of you work on it. I wanted to really give it to someone that it was much closer to flow. Because if I knew that that was going to happen, the creativity would kind of peak up. I wouldn't have to micromanage them because they'd have a high degree of interest. They'd be learning. They'd be developing their skills. One of the things I will say about leadership, David, is that the best leaders are developing more leaders. It's not about just developing yourself. You want to develop yourself, but you're developing more leaders. And then we would have a discussion with the staff, right? And the staff um, would contribute, and sometimes we could move it to someone uh, that was much more in the flow. Sometimes we couldn't. A lot of times people would say, hey, I can take over this project that you're working on that seems to be in the boredom area because that would be good for me. And then you could take this, even though I
And,
have
it-
the open
and
time.
and identifying that, sometimes you just need that break, right? If you've just gone through it, depending on life strategies and things like that, but also job wise, right? If you just finished a big time crunch, you might want to do something in that boredom area just to kind of catch your breath, right? You can't run a marathon, and great leaders have what you're really explaining is that pulse on the overall situation, and
Hmm.
also, a great leader also is great when they are able to leave the room and nothing changes. It's not just the impact of the room they're in, it's the impact of the people that he's brought up to the levels and paying attention in that flow state. Or I love it with because it's one of the languages that we talk about here, the sweet spot. The
Yeah.
sweet spot for us doesn't mean that everything worked out 100%, but we did the best that we could and it felt good. Not every decision you're going to make is going to be perfect, but if you
Hmm.
made all the right decisions, assumed the right risks, and taught your people the right way, that's a sweet spot leader.
Yeah, yeah, and that really reminds me of a story. One of the things that, so two things I would do when I had a new person come to my staff, whether it was an internal transfer or a new college grad or somebody that we hired from the outside, I'd have a conversation with them that contained two elements. And this is day one when they came in. And the first thing I would tell them, which was quite a shocker to them, was, I don't want you working for me 18 months from now.
Mm.
Today is the day we're going to think about where you're going to go, right? And I want to be able to I want other people to come after you so that you get that opportunity to grow, whether it's a lateral, but it has to be a minimum of a lateral move, and most likely more to an advancement move, right? And the second thing is I want you to think from a leadership perspective. That, today is day one. I don't care whether you don't have any direct reports. I want you to think about when you come in with a problem or whatever, I want you to think about what would Kevin do, or what would somebody in Kevin's level do. And then if you have a challenge, you have to bring, when you come in to talk to me, you have to bring one of two things. If you have a problem, what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to come in and say, hey, I've got this problem. What would you recommend? I want you to come in with, hey, I have this problem. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. Can I bounce that off of you to see if that's a good approach, or you'd recommend something different? Or if you're stuck, you have to be able to come in to show me where you're stuck. I've looked at this information. I've talked to these people. and now I don't know the next step, right? I said, you have to be able to show me your critical thinking process.
Sure.
And if you
Yeah.
can do that, it's to teach the person to fish or the man to fish kind of thing. If you can do that, then you can move forward and you can move in a leadership position. So the quicker that I can get people in my staff that can replace me, the more opportunities are for me, and there are more opportunities for them. And this drove a lot of my managers crazy because I had a large turnover, but from the perspective of not that they were leaving because they didn't want to work for me, they're leaving for another opportunities. And I think the kind of all came to a head in 2000. I took my wife to Hawaii for our 20th wedding anniversary. And I had staff in like 8 different sites, so a lot of things were virtual. Weren't using video then; it was just audio. And I never ran any of my staff meetings. We rotated that. Everybody had an opportunity because I want to get people to be
Mhm.
comfortable running staff meetings. So right before I left, I had somebody designated. I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. I'll come back. And I came back 2 weeks later and I sat in the staff meeting. Of course, somebody else was running it. And then there was a certain thing that came up with a project um, that we were really having some challenges on. And I started asking questions. And finally, the one guy in Hudson, Massachusetts, that was on my staff just blew up. It's like, Kevin, we have been talking about this for the last 2 weeks. Where the hell have you been? And and I said, well, I've been in Hawaii, and everything went quiet. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
And what I recognize is, that was kind of a turning point for me. It's like the staff is running at full functionality,
Mhm.
and this guy in Massachusetts doesn't even know that in the discussions in the staff meeting that Kevin's not participating. And that was the normal. I was normally there, from a leadership perspective rather than kind of running the meetings, and everybody else ran the meetings. And certainly I was there as a backstop for them, but I wanted them to get comfortable doing that. So when they moved into their next position, they could easily step into that. Oh yeah, I've done that. When we used to rotate it every month. Every month somebody had different responsibilities. So it was rewarding, and I had the opportunity I was managing Intel University at that time when the management, the first line manager program for the world came up. That was my interest, and it was easy for me to move in because I had, a whole group of people that many of them could have just moved into my spot.
Right, which is great. Which, like I said, as a great leader, you could walk out of the room, which was the exact example that you just
Right.
gave us, and nothing stopped. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, I know you've done a lot. So not only ran, I mean, Intel, right? One of the major, the Fortune 50 companies. They're probably, I don't know, Fortune 20. I don't, you know, but they're when you work with that level, there's a certain level, right? Every level you go, you keep growing on that. But then you became an author. And one of the books that, we talked about, I'd love to hear about the Leader of Oz, because everybody knows the Wizard of Oz, but there are leaders. I'd love you to share a little bit about that philosophy, how you've got to that point on the path for, the yellow brick road.
Sure. All right. Well, David, thanks for asking about that. Um, when I left Intel, I took in 2007, I had this personal goal. I wanted to retire at 50, and I was able to do that. I took two of my colleagues, Marlene Lundy and Dr. Ali Lakhani. We all left together, and we started up Magnet Leadership Solutions, really to be able to provide leadership programs for uh, small to medium-sized organizations that didn't have like $10 million budgets,
Mm.
type of thing. And we've been able to do that. We're going to celebrate our 19th year in June. And
Congratulations.
Dr. Lacan, so one of the things I learned from many of my entrepreneurial colleagues who started up businesses, doing consulting or teaching or coaching, all of them said the same thing. The successful ones is you have to have a book. So we were Dr. Lacani and I were speaking at a conference. He lived in up in by Sacramento, and we were speaking at a conference in San Francisco. And this is the first year when we first got started, and you don't have a lot of extra money to spend. So we were driving back and forth each day, and being in the car, with for 2 hours or 2.5 hours each way, you end up talking about a lot of different things. And one of the things we were working on is so Dr. Lacani was actually one of my doctoral students. He was also a software manager at Intel. We shared a lot of the same philosophies, and we really became very, very good friends as he was going through the doctoral process, and I was helping him with his dissertation, kind of as a mentor. And he developed an incredible tool called the Caliber Leadership Assessment Tool, which I could do a whole nother session on, but I won't do that.
Well, we'll
And
have you back.
and one of the things that Dr. Lacani did was that he had actually collected a lot of really good quantitative data. And between the work that I had done on motivation and engagement for team and what he had done on leadership, we had lots of concepts. So we started outlining what I would call more of an academic book, but it was so boring that even we didn't want to read it. So in the car as we're going back and forth speaking in San Francisco, um, what we recognized is we were talking about movies and books and things that we like to do and family. And what we realized was both of us, our favorite movie, or at least one of our favorite movies and books, was the Wizard of Oz. And I said, "That's it. Let's just do the book. We'll call it The Leader of Oz, right?" And Dr. Lacani said, "Oh, I bet you that's been done 100 times." So when we got back to his house that night, we logged into the Library of Congress to see if it had been done. No one had ever done that. So we grabbed the name, um, and then we committed to have the book done. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to take all of this really good foundational academic stuff, but we wanted to make it practical. So we said, hey, let's target this. Um, at an 11th grade reading level that you could actually even use it within high schools. But we don't want it to be silly, right? But we want to be able to give it to executives.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
the key is we want to put all of our philosophies about leadership, about team development, about motivation and engagement, about flow, understanding different behavioral styles. So we took all of this massive knowledge base that we had, um, and because most people have seen The Wizard of Oz or have read the book, The
Yep.
Wizard of Oz, we didn't have to do any character development, which was really nice. So we kept the characters pure. So rather than have Dorothy, we have Dora. Instead of having the Tin Man, we have Tim Man.
Yep.
And Howard, instead of the Cowardly Lion, we have Howard Lee Lion, right? And all of them maintain their personas in the book, right? Because it's, the Wizard of Oz is a beautiful book for leadership because it has all the different behavioral styles. Um, Dorothy is essentially, or Dora in this case, is the leader, right? And they have to go through, things that are necessary to kind of prove themselves, and what she does in order to bring the three disparate individuals together is really just a study in leadership. So we made it fun. We build in a rubric at the end of each chapter. There's like five or six elements that
Hmm.
you can check off. And then at the end of the book, you take all those elements, the ones that you've checked and the ones you haven't checked, and you put it in this chart. And it basically says, from a leadership perspective, are you more like Dorothy or the Tin Man or the Cowardly Lion or the Scarecrow? And it's really understanding the different styles. So it was really fun to do. We're on our second printing of it. It's been very successful. We use it a lot in our leadership programs. And if anybody wants something just really fun to do with their team, it's segmented into very small chapters that I would recommend doing that. And if you want to talk to me about it, I'd love to tell you how other teams have used it, in a kind of a fun and not too rigorous
Oh, why don't you tell
restrictive
us?
way.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little, as we're going to start rounding up the episode, but I'd love to hear how it becomes practical. I mean, all of this is nice in theory, but it's the practicality, it's the, experiential experiences that really help us learn that much better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so real quick, 1 minute or less is, the book is based around mostly a good portion of it, Dr. Lakhani's work on cultural leadership, and it identifies 10 different elements of leadership, and all the chapters are focused on each one of the, um, not, not all the chapters focus on all 10, but individual chapters have a different focus of usually one or two areas.
Mhm.
So, and the one thing that we have found is that communication is really the number one element, that if you can get better, if you don't take anything else out of this podcast, is if you can get better communication, right? Better at listening, and better communicating, making sure that the other person is understanding, you will be viewed much higher as a leader, more so than developing additional level of competence or confidence, or you know being a servant leader. Any one of the other elements, all of those contribute, but communication contributes really the most. And he did his study on 43 different countries, and all of the countries, communication is in the top element. So if you have to do something, get better at communicating and listening, and that'll give you a nice big bump forward.
Yeah, well, you just jumped ahead of it. I always have every guest walk into my magic garden and give us one more piece of advice on the way out. I mean, it sounds like communication, but might you have any one other tidbit? I mean, you've given us a lot during this episode.
Yeah, so I'll use a tip that Shirzad uses in positive intelligence, and my business partner uses this on me all of the time. And what he says is, when you're truly listening to another person, you're focused on them, and you're not processing how you're going to respond. And one of the things is that generally, even if somebody else has a crazy idea, or what you think is a stupid idea, or something that's way out of the box, there's usually something there, right? And what Shirzad says in positive intelligence is usually 10% of what they've said you could at least say, yeah, that's reasonable to do. And what my business partner does was, so if I give him this crazy idea of what I want, right, and I know it's a little bit out of the box, he'll usually start the conversation with, what I like about that is, and then he pull the element out, and then we build off the element. And what I found is it's very, very difficult. And I use this technique quite a bit on people that I'm doing executive coaching with, or people in the leadership programs. And particularly if they're a little bit off base, there's usually something in there that's aligned. And I'll start with, like, what I like about that is, and then I pick the element that they had done. I'll talk about kind of the situation that it could be used, and then the advantage of doing that. And using a good brainstorming technique would be, is just, let's just expand upon that. And I found it's very difficult for people to be angry at you, um, or not want to engage, if you start out with, what I like about that is, and you really bring something into focus, as opposed to what most of us do. It's like, well,
Yeah.
it's kind of not really
Uh,
what I was looking for, and it's a little too far out of the box. You start there, conversations are difficult.
for sure. Well, thank you so much for all the conversations you've given us today. And how can everybody find you?
So the probably easiest way is just send me an email to Kevin at Magna Leadership, Magna leadership.com. And the thing I'll promise you is, if you want to talk about any of the concepts that we've done, I love to talk about them. If we do connect, either video or audio, or even just electronically, the one thing I promise is you're never going to get a sales pitch from me. I will not pitch you to try to hire me or thing like that. We have a nice steady stream of clients. And if I can be helpful, that's part of the servant leadership model. And I can help you, fantastic. And at some point in time in the future, if you want something more, like you'd like to come and join one of our leadership academies, that's great. And if not, that's okay as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and I'll definitely be looking into this. I always love to expand my mind and expand my horizons on leadership and the different ways that people go about doing it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Great.
And
All right.
everybody else, I wish you peace and love in your life as always. And when you bring a bat, be awesome today. Thank
I
you.
am really glad that you're enjoying the show, and I hope you follow us on all the podcast hosting sites, as well as Facebook, Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Or you can follow me, Uncle Dave, David Shemetsky, at Facebook, Instagram, and www.davidshemetsky.com. I also would enjoy for you to contact me if you want to just have some feedback. You need somebody to talk to at peacelovebringabat@gmail.com. Love to hear your feedback. Thanks. Well, my friends, today's journey has come to a close. I hope the seeds of peace and love continue to grow for each one of you. Remember, the peace and love surrounds you that will assist you to rise again. And don't forget to bring a bat for what you believe in. Namaste.